Thank you, Irene. Good afternoon, everyone. As Irene mentioned, I'm in the School of Engineering in Trinity. I suppose we're an air pollution research group that obviously undertakes a lot of measurement work, but our end goal is defining solutions, whether it's through modelling and then obviously policy or design. So the backdrop of this project was an alarm, if you will. One of the EPA monitoring stations close to Houston train station in Dublin, and indeed other train stations in Dublin, identified emissions that were starting to creep above our annual limits. I'm very acutely aware of our previous speakers in terms of making sure that annual limits and hourly values aren't on the same graph, but just to give you an indication of that's the kind of typical profile in blue of what we may be observing in terms of some pollutants like NO2 throughout the day. And if it was like this every day, we're in trouble. Of course, that can be more sporadic when you look at it at different resolutions, and I'll talk about that later. But the goal of this project was to try and come up with a framework to understand the contribution of our railway hubs in Dublin and its impact on different stakeholders, whether it's the individual right up to the environs around it. Trying to distinguish who's responsible or where it's coming from, whether it's the diesel trains, the road traffic, or indeed, as Jurgita mentioned earlier, background, perhaps solid fuel sources. So we have to position ourselves in where we're at in Ireland in this space. We want to take monitoring data from different sources, such as airquality.ie, and also to extract our own information at a more local scale. We want to evolve that, and that's where our work in modelling comes in, trying to understand how it's moving at such a finite scale and come up with essentially solutions through informed assessments. So where are we at in this space? Forgive me, I'll just go back a slide. In reality, this space of train stations or hubs is very poorly known. But essentially, when you look at it, ports and airports as settings and different tools of how to assess, there's some areas that are very good. So a lot of this knowledge we want to transfer into the railway hub setting. But I think this is a very powerful image, and I hope you can all see this at the back, that little video that's taking place, because that's in one of our train stations in Dublin, and essentially you can see the pollution. So it's not Delhi that we can't just see the pollution, and I observed it this morning taking the train here. You can sometimes see the pollution, and you're definitely more aware of it. But we're, as an air pollution researcher, aware of what you can't see as well. And we've started undertaking exercises, firstly, to understand the individual level exposure. The blue line is the sporadic experience. And one of the challenges we have to discuss, and our speaker from this morning from the Irish Heart Foundation, what triggers our events? Yes, we're losing 1,400 lives per year, but is it chronic or acute triggers? Is it triggers or is it long-term exposure that's leading to these health impacts? So that some of these spikes are instantaneous and you could be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So there's great value in the work that research projects do where we combine fine-scale resolution data with the more I suppose coarser and strategically placed EPA monitors throughout the country. So our exercise at the moment, we're going through a monitoring exercise, and this project will have 2 more years behind it, where we're trying to collate data that helps us inform solutions. So we're trying to understand what is the particulates made of, where is the NO2 coming from, is it the traffic outside the station or inside the station? And so over the last couple of months, we've been essentially trying to strategically understand where we should extend our campaign. It's so important to understand where the pollution is at its best, at its worst, and then from that information go further. So I won't spend much time on this, but essentially we gathered some understanding of the space, not over 12 months, but simply a month. And we also understand environmental conditions. Wind direction and wind speed has a huge influence on where the pollution is been taken. So Connolly and Houston, very distinct conditions as two of the main hubs in Dublin. And what's worrying is that the levels, even though we're talking annual limits, within the periods that we measured, these are exceeding it. So just an example, depends on what platform you're on. That's how fine a granularity we were trying to understand. But what was most insightful at this early stage of the project is whether or not the train station is the dominant source, or even a relatively significant source. And the reality was that it depends. It depends on the wind direction and where you are. And when it came to considering the St. John's Road situation, there was a breakdown of separating out the different wind directions and whether it was literally being taken from myself to any of you in the audience. If the wind was blowing in that way, you had to have that amplified effect. I suppose what I wanted to highlight maybe is, yes, Houston, we're only in this early stages of the monitoring and analysis. What I want you to pay attention to is the number on the right. I'm sorry for those on the back row, but essentially in Houston Station, the concentration range from 0 to 40 for PM2.5. What was most alarming within the context of Conley Station is that at one of the platforms we had figures of up to 200. 5 times higher. Essentially, these train stations in Dublin are quite unique in that they're not outdoor settings, they're not indoor settings, they're quite naturally ventilated but also quite sealed. And so some of the quite poignant findings so far is that we need to understand how to either let the pollution out and allow the individuals who work there and people who pass through there as commuters reduce their exposure. And especially reduce the exposure that may either trigger a health event or indeed long-term exposure that might lead to more significant health problems. Not to say that short-term exposure isn't of a concern too, especially to certain vulnerable population groups. So we're at that stage now of the project, and again we have a year or two ahead of us. We have to transform this knowledge and extend our monitoring campaign to try and compilate what is the impact throughout the year of our urban railway stations, but then also try and find transferable information to the likes of Kilkenny, who are trying to set ambitions for their air quality improvements. How does the train station impact here? Or indeed does it, and when does it? So where we're moving forward to, and really our findings will be much more extensive in a year from now, is that we're going to extend this monitoring program because we want to improve our ability to, I suppose, disaggregate the emission sources. We also want to understand to some degree what's in it, because not all particulates is bad particulates, especially as a child who ate a lot of sand and salt if you're in a coastal environment. But then what our role is, especially as engineers, is we want to define appropriate mitigation measures. These would be ventilation design, simply removing the pollution. We're not removing it because Irish Rail have great ambition to do other tasks whereby they will electrify, hybridize, even bring in alternative fuels. And from there, then we'll look at the kind of separating technological solutions with policy solutions for the years ahead. What we hope, though, is that what we learn from Dublin is also transferable. We're not in the silo of focusing on Dublin. We want to understand and share, and we will ensure that. So that's kind of a snapshot of the overview of our project Station Air. I'll happily just take questions later, and obviously this project wouldn't be in place without the support of the EPA, Department of Transport, and indeed Irish Rail, and our research team. Thank you very much.